introductions and let each of our legislators tell us a little bit more about themselves and how they got to this level of public service. And so, Representative King, why don't we start with you?
Oh, great. My name is Dennis Keene. I represent the 67th House District, which where we're all sitting. And to give you an idea how far back I go in the district is, I was here before there were any buildings here. This is where I started. This is where my family farm was. We raised chickens and cows. This was all country land back in the day. That's been quite a few years ago. But it's been great to have the university here. It's such a big part of our economy in northern Kentucky. I was first elected in '05, and I currently have, this is my 12th year I'll be going into. I'm the chair of License and Occupations, which what that is primarily a business committee, and we deal with over 400 licenses in the state of Kentucky. Anybody from lawyers to doctors to horse breeders to acupuncture, and we even cover bourbon and gambling. So it's a very diverse group that we deal with. If you need to change the scope of your license, you have to come before our committee, and likewise in the Senate. And we're one of the areas that have a unique thing in that particular realm of activity. We have Senator Schickel, who is over in Boone County, chairs it in the Senate. So we have a lot of a clout over license and occupation throughout the state, just here in northern Kentucky. I'm married. I have 2 children. Both of them graduated from NKU. My youngest is a social worker. They didn't have a master's program when she was here, and she went to U of L and got her master's degree there. And then my daughter Kelly works here at the Science and Arts Foundation, I believe. And so that's about my whole story.
Okay. Senator McDaniel, you want to introduce yourself?
Yep. My name is Chris McDaniel. I'm from Taylor Mill. I represent the 23rd Senate District, which is the basically the northern third of Kenton County. I have represented that district for 2.5 years now. I chair the Senate's Appropriations and Revenue Committee, which is the Budget and Taxation Committee for the Kentucky State Senate. We oversee, just like it says, all of the revenue and how we appropriate it for the Commonwealth. I also serve on licensing and occupation, banking and insurance, military veterans affairs and public protection, and state and local government. So it keeps me very busy. For my full-time job, I actually own McD Concrete over in Erlanger. If any of you ever just south of Buttermilk Pike, look there on your right-hand side, and you'll see our office building. And got the privilege over the last about year or so to work with Charlotte and Jason and a lot of other great people on the bill that we'll be talking about tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here tonight. My name is Will Schroeder. I'm a state senator for the 24th District. And the way the Senate District works is about 115,000 people that we represent. So while Chris, maybe has the luxury of having a smaller area in Kenton County, I have a little bit more spread out area. So I have Campbell, Pendleton, and Bracken to make up the district. So a little bit of a drive at times, but it's a great district. As mentioned, my wife and I live in Wilder, Kentucky, and if it was a little bit nicer out, I could have walked here actually. So it's pretty close. I grew up. My father was a judge for almost 30 years, so kind of always been around politics. And then really in undergrad and law school, I went here to NKU at Chase College of Law. Really got interested in campaigns, and then after that, helped some candidates, including Chris McDaniel. I was happy to help and see get elected. And then, opportunity came for me to run. And at that time, I had been assistant prosecutor here in Campbell County. And one of the worked on numerous types of cases, but obviously with the heroin epidemic, the drug cases, be it possession or trafficking, were really taking up most of the docket. So this was an issue that I spent a lot of time on and made a big part of my platform on the campaign. So,
Since this class is about advocacy, and one of the grassroots advocacy groups that we were going to be talking about is PAR, what value do you see, if any, of grassroots advocacy as a legislator? How is it of value to you and to the work that you do in Frankfort? And if so, how?
Well, so I'll start talking about PAR specifically, and then we'll move into some generalities. How's that? Jason was a known quantity to me because of his work. He emails the legislators stuff from PAR all the time, and so it was really interesting meeting him for the first time because I knew his name, I knew his affiliation just from the emails that he would send regularly on updates from PAR. And so it's critically important because a lot of times we can't know every issue or the nuances of every issue unless there are people there who are helping us know those things. And you have professional advocates, you have volunteer advocates. I mean, you have people who advocate for organizations, people who advocate for issues. But that constant contact is just absolutely crucial because, especially when we get into session, you will find that the hallways are filled with people wanting to talk about something. And, they're all there because they're passionate about their issues. There's 4.3 million Kentuckians. And so consequently, there's a lot of people with passion for a lot of things, and having people there, being able to get people to Frankfort is critical.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. We can't, there's just so many issues, and trying to stay caught up on everything. One of the biggest surprises for me, just, finishing the first session, we had over 750 bills in a short session in Kentucky. And so for someone that really likes to go through all the legislation and read it and research it and call people that I know that are in that field and get, different opinions on everything, I mean, it was crazy just how much legislation is coming at you every day. So it is really important that we hear from advocacy groups. And also I think it's really impactful when they're from your area, because you're going to notice that, and sometimes you already have connections, already know people. And that certainly is helpful too, but just having them be from your area, your antenna goes up, and because usually too, if they're from your area, it's an issue that of course we're watching out for all of Kentucky, but at the same time we're watching out for our districts, and a lot of times if they're from our area, it's an issue we might already know about.
And I think Chris hit on something. We all are part-time legislators, and we're not experts on everything. People think we are, and some of our colleagues think they are, but unfortunately they aren't. And so when people that come up, and there's gosh, I guess there's probably maybe 500 or 600 paid lobbyists that are always at our door, knocking on our door about things. So when you have people like yourselves that take their own time to come up and engage with us, it's not a lot of fun being down there. I don't know anybody that wants to come down there and do that, but you have to be passionate about what you're wanting. You're taking time away from your family and from your job in some cases to come down here and lobby on something that you're passionate about. And that's the best lobbyist there is somebody that's passionate about their cause. So we were very fortunate that Northern Kentucky really set the bar this year with your...
You've heard this mentioned several times. We were talking about the 4 Ps, you remember, on Tuesday night? What's the one that you've been hearing about tonight? What has been mentioned more than once? The passion.
Passion.
Yeah, passion. It does take passion to really be successful with advocacy. So Representative Keene has already touched on this. What would you all want to add about what difference that the grassroots advocacy made in the passage of Senate Bill 192, which is better known as the heroin bill?
One of the things that's important is the sustained effort and the personal involvement, and what I'm referring to in Charlotte and Jason, I mean, we met in Carroll County, we've met in Frankfort, we've met at my office in Erlanger, we worked our way through bills, we disagreed, we agreed, we argued, we compromised, we did so many things. This is, it's not a show up for one day and go home and the problem is solved. And frankly, the problem is not solved when we leave Frankfort either. We hopefully just establish a framework. I mean, the hard work is done by you guys on the front lines, right? We really just put in place a framework to hopefully empower people, be it through different legal mechanisms, financial mechanisms, et cetera, to be able to execute the good work on the ground. So certainly, Grassroots was critical to it. It really established for a lot of people in Frankfort the understanding of the problem that we had up here. Because frankly, most of this state is not dealing with heroin right now. We've got a lot of areas still dealing with prescription pain pills. We've got a lot of areas still dealing with meth. We've seen some new drugs begin to creep their way into eastern Kentucky, but heroin as a unique drug, the vast majority of counties still haven't even seen it yet. So for them to understand and appreciate the depth of the issue in this area, it took it took an army of people, time and time again, to really set the predicate for the bill to pass.
Yeah, I agree with Chris that, talking to Senator Chris Gertler, actually, from Somerset one day, I was talking to him about an issue that he was dealing with, asking his feelings on it, and he said, Will, really, in Somerset, we haven't had a heroin problem yet. And so to Chris's point, for the other senators to see all the people, and as Dennis mentioned, NKY Hates Heroin, just being there. So then when we were talking, they understood that it wasn't just our passion, but that it was something that was really impacting our communities. Gave us a little bit more credibility, I think, seeing that all the people that were there. Also, I think there's something to be said about there are a number of nights or I guess afternoons maybe that we would be in session, and I look up and I know Charlotte and other members of the community were up there in the balcony, and that was something I appreciated just because we were working hard to kind of get our message out and make sure things were done. But I just felt like they were there just kind of encouraging and not necessarily cheerleaders, but it was good to have you guys there just to say, hey, we recognize what you're doing and we appreciate that you're working. It made me feel good about that.
Senator McDaniel mentioned another one of those P's. You remember he said it's not just a one-time deal. What's the other P that we talked about on Tuesday?
Persistence.
Persistence. And he also mentioned the empowerment too. So initially, and I know it was actually Senator McDaniel that championed this bill to begin with, and but for all of you, what motivated you to be champions and supporters? Because all three legislators that are sitting before us tonight were just that. They were champions and supporters of Senate Bill 192. So what motivated you to even take that on initially?
I think we got to acknowledge somebody. Senator Katie Stein is the one that brought this first before our body, and she's very passionate about it and did one tremendous job. In the General Assembly, to get a bill passed the first time out is pretty impossible. And as bad as what heroin was, she really took it to task and put all of her effort in to getting this done. Unfortunately, it didn't happen in the first year. So I think all of us have witnessed the problems with heroin, and we've all kind of vowed to continue that fight. And this is one of those unique situations. I've been in General Assembly 12 years. I've been on many conference committees. And this is the first conference committee that I've ever been on that we debated the facts on it, and we were all passionate about it, but we didn't get out and fight over politics. We all had a vested interest in taking something back home that would help our community. And I think each and every one of us on both sides of the fence worked together hand in hand, not like what you see in Washington, but we were all there many a night. After session was over, we were in some room arguing and fussing with each other, and we wound up getting something done.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I guess to your point, the P's, I don't know how many P's you guys have.
We had 4.
4, okay, well, yeah, Dennis was right about get things done in Frankfort, you have to be persistent, and this wasn't just a one-time deal. I kind of felt like I was the fortunate beneficiary of getting in the role, and then it passes the first year I was down there, the first session. But for me, I guess to answer your question, going back to being a prosecutor, this was something that I had seen, and it was something that I became just passionate about, and had met Jason, and I guess all of you, well, I shouldn't say all of you, but a number of you earlier just in that role, and just trying to see what I could do. And then when I started campaigning on that issue and going door to door and talking to people, so many people just opened up to me, and just said, hey, you have to get something done. And as the session starts going, so many people are saying, hey, you guys have to do something. You have to do something. And as Chris mentioned, we're not going to solve the problem, but there was the pressure there to get the ball rolling and hand over some tools for you guys to continue the fight. And so, yeah.
I mean, very much heroin became a regional issue. I mean, every one of us has something that we do for a living, like we talked about. I mean, my kind of typically the things that I'm involved in revolve around finances and budgeting and some construction and contracting type issues, because that's the background, that's what you're used to, be it legal or be it housing services or whatever. We all have our things that we specialize in, but there's also issues that are regional issues. And this is definitely very much was a regional issue, which is how I became involved with it literally on the drive home the session before this, when the last bill failed in trying to work and get things together. And it's like Dennis said, the good thing is, as regional people, we didn't let politics get in the way of this. And you've got to be willing to compromise. For example, the bill that went over to the House was actually called Senate Bill 5. The way this worked out is I filed the bill, and then later I was announced as a candidate for lieutenant governor. And Senate Bill 5 carried my name as the sponsor, and there were folks in the other chamber, not Representative King, but who had decided that no bills with my name on them were allowed to pass. And so they sent it back on a different bill with a different guy's name on it, who actually voted against the bill, but he gets credit as the sponsor of the bill.
That's Frankfurt.
So just so that my name would not be associated primarily with the bill. But it's a real tribute in Charlotte and hundreds of others who have worked on this, that as long as you don't care about who gets the credit, it's amazing what you can do. And that's a lot of what happened with this issue. A lot of people had to compromise on things that they thought that they wouldn't at the beginning necessarily, and it's all kinds of different things. So you become advocates in different ways, and that's kind of how I got involved with this.
So that kind of leads into my next question, which is, do you consider yourself an advocate within the legislature or without?
Yeah, so we are there to advocate for our 108 to 115,000 constituents. We're really, when you stop and think about what is the General Assembly, what does it mean? I almost look at it kind of like it's a pyramid of momentum, right? And ultimately, as the representative of the 23rd District, I get put at the very tip of that pyramid. But there's 108 to 115,000 people for each one of us that we're representing, whose issues and whose ideas and whose passions we show up in Frankfort to represent. And I really view it that way, that there's a group of us going down. We just happen to be the people at the very tip of that group whose job it is to express that for your district, for your constituency. So certainly every one of us ends up as a regional advocate, as an occupational advocate, on a number of issues.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. I mean, I think, he mentioned he was the sponsor. I think anytime you're going to sponsor a bill, you have to, going back to your piece, you have to have the passion to get that done. Some bills obviously are a lot easier to get passed than others, but for a bill like Senate Bill, what at one time was Senate Bill 5, for Chris to do everything he did, he clearly had to have the passion to do it, because it took, as Dennis mentioned, a lot of late nights and a lot of hours, especially for a job that's considered part-time, So to that extent, to be passionate, yeah, I think you have to be considering yourself an advocate for the cause.
Yeah, if I might add, my daughter Kelly, I'm an advocate. A big thing for me in my career has been fighting drunk driving, and because it impacted my life personally. And before I got into General Assembly, my daughter Kelly, who works here at NKU, back in, I believe it was 92, I think, she was hit head on by a drunk driver and left for dead. And they had entrapped her in the car, and he had got out of his car and was trying to get his car going again while my daughter was screaming and smoke was filling up the car, begging for her life. And that's something that impacted my life and my heart. And so I presented a bill on ignition interlock bills, which basically cuts about 30% of the deaths in vehicles due to drunk driving. And they've done it all over the nation. But I started out about 10 years ago. I've handed that bill up, at least every session. And I'd get out of the House and it'd run out of time or whatever happened in the Senate. But I just kept on coming back because I was passionate about it. I was an advocate for it. And I wasn't going to let this thing die just because of it just wasn't being heard. And this year, I had the same experience that Chris did. Senator McGarvey from Louisville popped up and said, listen, I really like your bill. He said, would you care if I do a companion bill of your bill? And that's what we did. His passed the Senate. Time was wearing out, but this was an opportunity to save lives. And that, like Chris said, it did not matter at that point. I had colleagues coming up to me. I can't believe that people would say, you know, this is your bill. You've worked all these years on it, and now somebody else is going to take credit for it. It isn't about taking credit, like Chris said. It's about saving lives and changing our state. And so whoever gets credit for it doesn't matter. But to go home every night and know that you've had an impact to save some people's lives, that's the satisfaction that's all you need.
Well, my next question was going to be, which advocacy effort are you the most proud of? So I think we had the answer for you, Representative Keene. And you know, the 4 Ps that we talked about on Tuesday were passion, purpose, persistence, and empowerment. And you know, that's what you had to get that done. You had the passion, you knew what your purpose was, and you were persistent. My goodness, 10 years. You know, when I started with Casey's Law, they told me it'll take at least 5 years. That's what I was told. And I would just say, okay, and just keep on going. And it actually passed in 2 sessions. So, you know, I don't know why, you know, that we were able to do it in 2 sessions, but we were. So, well, thank you for your effort, for your persistence, and because we know that is saving lives today. What if either one of you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, just, you know, first term, first session, was definitely the heroin bill, just because that was something that, you know, I ran off of, I had talked about, I'd been passionate about, and so I was really glad that and just with the frustrations that were experienced in the past sessions with that, you know, kind of failing in the last seconds or last hours of the sessions, previous sessions, it was nice to finally get that done. So it was a great moment.
Sure, heroin was obviously a great one, but you know, you have different things on different levels that you have to deal with. Like I say, for a regional and a social type issue, heroin for sure would be at the top of them. But also, you know, the Commonwealth can't confront problems like heroin. We put $10 million in this year, and we'll have about $14 million, give or take, moving forward each year in the biennial budget. But we can't confront problems that involve resources if we don't have a Commonwealth with a sustainable budget as well. You know, we confronted pension reform 3 years ago, which was critical, and we're still going to have to continue to work on that. But our ability to get that bill passed was another really great one, because if you know, there so many things are impacted by items that you don't really realize. How does pensions relate to heroin? Well, if we can save more money here, we can invest that money elsewhere, because there is a limited supply of dollars, of tax dollars, to be invested. And so we've got to confront some of these problems that don't get as much attention. I mean, heroin, I mean, you know, we have people literally dying in our streets almost every night, right? I mean, that gets a lot of attention. But you can't fund the recovery effort for those people if you've bankrupted yourself with pensions over here, okay? And so a lot of times the relationship between issues has to be taken in the whole, and so, you know, you can be very proud of one and the other, but those would be the 2 that I certainly have a lot of pride in.
You know, as an advocate, and we are always, or as advocates, we are always trying to encourage other people to become advocates. You know, I said when I first started speaking, it was to raise awareness about the disease of addiction and inspire other people to advocacy. And one of the things that I always encourage people to do is get acquainted with their legislators, their representative and their senator. So as a legislator, what would be your advice to people and what would be the best way to initiate any kind of relationship with their representative or their senator, so that when they can build up a rapport that then later may serve well to address an issue?
One thing I would suggest is, during the session, we were just swamped. I think Chris mentioned, you have so many people coming to see you, and, I'd have constituents just stop by all the time and not realize, have any idea what kind of schedule. We're on a pretty tight schedule where you have meetings every 15 minutes often, then you're off to a committee meeting, then a caucus meeting, then you're out on the floor. So, of course, when constituents stop by, you want to make that time for them, but sometimes it's just, you have basically your secretary has to apologize for you and say, hey, we have to try to schedule you in somehow, and we can't do it in the next couple hours. But really, even with the schedule, you're looking at maybe 15 minutes, and so my advice would be the best thing to do is to start that relationship early on. I know Chris has been talking, there's some social work issues. I have a constituent, Chris and I went to an event dealing with social work and some of the problems that they're facing. But one of the constituents has met me. We've just met for coffee a couple times at Frisch's. And and I actually gave her the Northern Kentucky Hates Heroin and more the impact team and said, look, this is what they did. They addressed these problems, and they outlined a battle plan, if you will. How are we going to solve these with legislation? Because for us, too, often people say, hey, this is a problem. And, of course, we hear that all the time. There's so many problems, and we need some guidance. So when someone comes to you with an outline, as the Impact Task Force did, I think that's really encouraging us, for us, because it gives us hope that, oh, okay, this is what I need to do, and then you're not necessarily spending hours just trying to come up with where do I even start on this issue. And a lot of times, again, for heroin, I was fortunate enough to have a background as a prosecutor to understand what Narcan was, to understand Vivitrol, all those things. But a lot of these issues, you might not have any idea at all. So it's a long answer, but yeah.
Well, and I think, I know from myself, I went to Frankfurt way back when, in 2003, assuming that legislators understood addiction the same way I did. And that's the wrong assumption to make. Like you said, that we cannot expect legislators to be familiar with every issue and every aspect of that issue. And so, but what I heard you say is that it's good to be able to offer up a plan so that you don't have to do the research. We've done the research and we can just give that information to you.
Right. No, it's really helpful because again, you're limited with. Everyone has issues, so
Right.
The more you can do to help us is helpful.
And like he said, when people show up for the first time ever during the middle of session, it's tough to establish the kind of rapport you need to influence them to hear a bill, to vote for a bill in committee, to vote for the bill on the floor. And certainly if you want them to make any changes or do anything specific, it becomes very tough if that's your first time, because the fact of the matter is you're probably one of 20 meetings on that day. And literally we walk in the lobby, it's crammed. We walk in the hall, it's crammed. We have people follow us in the bathroom talking to us. That's our life. And I'm not complaining about that, but that is the reality of the life that we lead when we're in Frankfurt. And so during the interim, when things are a little bit slower, we all try to do a lot of public events, come up to us, talk to us. Everybody here is a real person, I leave here tonight and, I go home and tuck kids in like everybody else, and I'll, get up tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock and go to work and work a job. And we're people just like everybody else. We're approachable, I don't think anybody of us has bit anybody recently, so just come up at events, say, hey, here's what I want to talk about, schedule some time, come see us, build that rapport during the interim, because frankly, it is a lot easier when I come in the office and Jason's sitting there and it's a friendly face too. Because a lot of times people come and see you on issues you might not agree with, or it might be a very difficult conversation, or you see Charlotte and you think, oh, I know this person. That makes the conversation much easier, and you have an instant level of credibility having met previously. And exactly like Will said, I mean, people bring us a myriad of problems. They really do. And if you have the problem, you probably have the solution too. You might not realize it. Or you might think, oh no, they don't want to hear my answer to the problem. Yes, we do. Yes, we really do, because you have experience that's brought you to this point. So if you come with problems, please come with solutions as well. I mean, you don't have to come with a bill. We've got professionals who can help you help us with the legislative reality of it. But certainly, establish that relationship early and help us solve problems. I mean, that's what we're there to do. And if you have those experiences getting to the problem, you also have the solution somewhere inside of you as well.
And I might add, being in the General Assembly, especially in northern Kentucky where our population is so dense, it's really kind of hard to know who your legislators are unless you've got a problem. Well, that's something that, especially in healthcare or anything like that, where you depend on the General Assembly with laws and different things, like we're constantly critiquing things. So it's very important for you to know at least who your legislator are and whose district that you're in. I mean, gosh almighty, I have people come in my office and they say, they're from Lexington, and they say, I voted for you every year. And you're sitting there and you're going, who are you, And so, they just don't have a clue. And then you have people that come in and the same story, and they are in your district, and they're not even registered to vote. And that's just, right now, if I push of a button, I can push a button on my laptop. I know you're voting where you vote at and everything. I mean, you have to be honest. And Chris is absolutely right. The worst thing that I see, now I'm talking from the business world. I'm not talking from social workers world. But when I have people come in, mostly it's about money and it's about territories. And I try to encourage them to, because we aren't experts, to try to figure out whoever their adversary is and try to find some little bit of compromise to where, because if you leave it in our hands, unfortunately, we will screw it up maybe. And what you get from us, you may not want. So I always encourage people to try to negotiate or talk to people that you're having conflicts with before you come to us to settle your problem. And that's really important.
And I want to touch on what he said just real briefly, because that is a brilliant piece of advice right there. Because understand, when we get involved, when your General Assembly gets involved in negotiating things, the pressures and influences on us may be very different than the pressures and influences on you. In particular, what he's talking about with some of the business issues, but on any issue, when there's two opposite sides, if you can come and say, this is a compromise bill, those are some of the best words we can hear. Because we know we're not going to get put in the middle of a fight. Because if we're in the middle of a fight and we've got a position here, there might be a completely unrelated bill, right, that our personalities end up getting involved with, or our leadership teams end up getting involved with, and things begin to horse trade. It's just the nature of the legislative process. This is not unique to Kentucky. It's not unique to the state Senate. It's, this happens in every government environment. And so that compromise bill that comes forward is frequently a far better solution, because once again, it's people with the same problems who might have a different solution. So see where you can get to the same solution and bring that forward. I mean, that's brilliant. Yeah, that's absolutely, I couldn't agree more with that.
A typical, I'll just point this out. We had a bill, I don't know if it was 2 years ago, but it was a turf battle between the doctors and the nurse practitioners. And it was just really intense. And Senator Schickel and I that came before our committees, and we finally said, these people are not negotiating with each other in good faith. And so we kind of took it upon ourselves to say, until you come up with some kind of compromise, we're just not going to hear the bill at all. And so that forced them to get together and come out with something, and didn't make us oversee something we didn't know anything about.
Anybody want to add anything else before we open it up to questions? Do you all have questions that you would like to ask? We really haven't talked about Senate Bill 192 at all, or anything that we've talked about tonight. Don't be shy. I love what you said, Senator McDaniel, about, because I think a lot of people are intimidated by legislators and, not realizing that that you guys are people too, and your moms or your dads, and, well, we do have moms in the legislature too, but moms and dads and, people that have families, and so, no questions?
Can I say anything or not?
I don't know if we should let you say anything or not.
Okay.
Maybe.
I'm gonna sit here and wait.
No, go ahead.
I didn't know if you were staying around to the end, but I wanted to throw in that I have a unique perspective now of the whole process. I'm not a Kentuckian, I moved here from Missouri, but I've lived here now since 1977. In a previous life, I worked in television, and I was the Frankfurt bureau chief and an investigative political reporter.
Oh, my goodness.
So in the early 80s, you saw me coming down the hallways, and I used to laugh about it because you all ducked pretty fast. And I'm glad your daughter survived and came out really good. I worked on I think one of Kentucky's first DUI legislation, on a special session. I think it was 1982 that we did that. And like I said, in the previous life, I should not have been covering that as an alcoholic, and it was a different perspective. Now, 20, 30 years later, now I'm the advocate, and I'm coming back at you from a different angle. And so I was gone for about 10 years out of the building, and it was nice when I came back for the very first session. It was, hi, great to see you. How are you? Some of the old timers, great to see you. And then sort of when they found out what we were doing, there it went again, back in the doorway. So I really appreciate from both sides, and I spend a lot of time in Washington, so I appreciate the schedule and the work that you do, and especially having to be part-time legislators and trying to run two businesses basically. So thank you for your efforts that you put in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say something about what you said, Frank, about the labeling, because, that certainly translates into people who have the disease of addiction, and a lot of labels are thrown around. And I appreciate what you said too about the classes, because, secrets kill people, I believe that. And, if we can talk openly and honestly about those hard topics, that's always a good thing.
Thank you, thank you.
Who else?
Oh.
Oh,
I was just going to ask your thoughts about the idea that our society is changing so quickly and so rapidly, and the rate of change is increasing so quickly and so rapidly, that society support structures like politics, like education, like religion, like healthcare, just cannot keep up. And if we keep trying to do things the same old way in a society that is changing at an ever faster rate, it's not going to work. What are your thoughts about that?
I guess that's definitely an interesting. I guess I hadn't really.
That's an easy question. I'll give it to Will.
It's definitely interesting. I guess one, with technology, obviously now, they say a person with a smartphone has more information in their hand than the president in like 1950 did. So on some hands, it's quickly evolving, quickly changing, but to the better in some extent. To Dennis's point about knowing who your representatives are, knowing who your House members or state senators are, how would you, before the internet, how would you get that information? It might be a phone call, but maybe some people might have the knowledge to call LRC, but most people probably wouldn't. But now you can really just Google something like that. So with that quick change also comes the ability to be better informed citizens. So I think it's an interesting theory, but I'm not sure I would necessarily reach that same conclusion that it's moving so fast that we can't keep up. Because to the same extent, when we're making our decisions down in Frankfurt, we're using the newest information. We're using information. We're using data. Data's playing a much larger role. Collecting data. We were talking about just earlier before we started about the number of addicts in Kenton County Detention Center, things like that. So I think those really can help drive the policy too.
And I want to, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I want to kind of piggyback on what he said because, I had an interesting interaction with a girl today who just got out of college. She's working over at Kenton County Fiscal Court now. She said she had, her associate's degree was in social media, which almost blew me away because when I got my master's degree here at NKU in 04, social media was just a brand new concept. I mean, people just started hearing of this thing called MySpace, right? And so you're right. There is a lot of very quick change, but I get back to a couple of things. First of all, I was describing to someone, I think that in 15 years, we will look back with a great degree of embarrassment at selfie sticks. I mean, in the level of what that embodies. But I think what hasn't changed, yeah, exactly. What hasn't changed is when a baby comes into this world, it is no less cold and disoriented and scared than it was 2,000 years ago. And when someone passes from this world, they are no less worried about what's going to happen on the other side, wondering what's going to happen to their family than they were 2,000 years ago. Now, the way we deliver and interact with one another between those two human events has somewhat changed, pretty dramatically. And I talk about my selfie stick example because it used to be, you'd say to somebody, hey, can you take a picture of us? And you'd have to interact with a complete stranger, just walking by, take a picture of us. And that level of human interaction is what we can't lose. Because when you're down, you don't need a Facebook friend to like your status. You need somebody to put their arm around you, right? When things are going well, you want to celebrate with your friends. It's nice to have all those likes. I mean, sometimes we put stuff on Facebook, we might get 200 likes, but other times we put stuff on there, we might have 300 people cuss us out too. So, but the nature of human interaction, and I think that will really be one of the things that we as a society and as a world have got to get our arms around is making sure that we don't lose that level of interaction, because I think the nature of the human condition is not changed. It's the technology that we use to interact with one another between those two defining events that we're really watching. So.
Well, and that's to the point of advocacy and the point of being able to talk to people and having that human contact and actually making your presence known and all of those things. Representative Keene, I think.
Technology is changing so quickly and so rapidly. We've become slaves of it. I remember when I go back a few years, a little bit more than you guys, but my first phone was a bag phone. I know some of you have seen a bag phone, but it was a big apparatus you had, and man, I had a phone. But the one good thing about it was I had to travel. So I would get in my truck. Sometimes I would just love to get in my truck and drive from point A to point B because that daggone phone wouldn't come on because I wasn't in a cell tower. Now, I mean, this is on us all the time. We've all got one in our pocket. This is how we keep up with the news. I get up every morning. My daughters tell me Twitter is ancient. But, I look at Twitter. That's how I get most of my news. And we're no longer getting news the way that Walter Cronkite or one of those guys they investigated this stuff. Now it's blogs and everything else. And so it's moving so quickly you don't know what to believe sometimes. And sometimes you have to have that time to research things and look at them. And I think, as much as what the internet has been a blessing to our world, it's allowed certain people, like in ISIS and these different places, where they can communicate with people all over the world and warp these young minds and to cause terrible things to happen. I mean, so technology is a good thing, but it's also we got to be careful with it. We can't let it just completely take over, our lives.
Carly, I think we're going to wrap up with your question. You had a question?
I have a question. One of the things I'm passionate about ties in with the whole heroin addiction and drug addiction and alcohol addiction. I've been very passionate about it in this class. Have you had anyone working on the fact of recidivism? And I'm very concerned with, and I brought this up at the last class, that the Louisville prison is one of the most expensive. I mean, the costs there are just outrageous. I mean, I think it's one of the most, that puts out most to take care of inmates in the country. And I brought up the point, you know, if someone could hear, you know, what about, I'm very big on not putting people who have addictions in prisons, which is a huge, huge, huge problem throughout the United States. My biggest concern is, you know, and it's same with mental illness. The mental illness, we used to have our hospitals and everything, of course, all of those got cut, the funding and everything. I mean, we still have some, and you've now got people with mental illness who are now in the you know, in prisons that shouldn't even be there. So, and now we've got a problem with overcrowding our prisons, and it's a huge, huge, huge problem. My passion is, if we were to take some of that money out of those prisons, that we're spending all this money, you know, on these inmates, and put that money toward facilities, you know, yeah, they might be like 12-step facilities, you know, that are, you know, under police officers and everything, but to help these people. I know that there are some, but we need more, especially with the epidemic and the problem that we have here. And if we were to have these facilities, these mental facilities, these different facilities set up to get the right treatment, I mean, I really think we could really have that money there if we were to get these people out of prison that shouldn't even be in prison. So is this been talk? Has anybody, I mean, this is a really big problem, something I'm really passionate about.
I think that Senate Bill 192 dealt with one of the first bills that I know that actually not only, we looked at not only incarceration and what it was doing, but we also looked at, you know, treatment and the benefits of it. I think in 192 was one of the first ones I know that dealt with what you're talking about. Not in a way that'll change everything, but it was the beginning of the first step.
And, you know, we spend the vast majority, probably close to 90% of our budget in three items. We say education, medication, and incarceration consume probably pushing 90% of our budget, and that's the truth. And so to that end, the theories inside of how you deal with people with mental illness swing on a pendulum. You know, 100 years ago, some of the best minds were still advocating for what we would refer to as insane asylums. You know, and we've swung very much towards more independent living, which has led to probably an increase in incarceration. And now we're seeing a bit of a swing back more towards some treatment, which, while they're not like what you would have called the old insane asylums, you know, it's more treatment-oriented, home-based models, things of that nature. So, I mean, we take these broad swings, and it's like that in every aspect of our society. If it's labor relations, you know, well, we might swing too far one way or too far the other way, or the way we handle mental illness is too far one way, too far the other way. And I think you are seeing, where I'm driving with this, is you are seeing a swing back towards, okay, this look at maybe we've got a population that's incarcerated who would be better served in some kind of a long-term treatment option versus an incarceration option, and you do hear more and more conversations on that. Sure.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot more conversations, and I think I would imagine if you compared the discussions that we had this past session with Senate Bill 192 and looking at treatment options compared to even the mindset maybe 20 years ago, just, you know, lock them up, I think that there's been a lot of change, I would imagine, to the way you would prefer it. But I would also say, as a former prosecutor, it was frustrating. You know, when I left there, there was one defendant who had been had 4 cases with us, and that wasn't at one time. That was over the years that I had been there, and it was for heroin addiction. So at some point, you know, a lot of people say like, "Oh, you guys are just locking everyone up." Well, that's not the case. At least in our office, we really tried to put people on diversion and get them set up with treatment, but then they would fail that, and maybe we'd give them a shot at probation, And then when they come back the third and the fourth time, you know, it begins getting tough. So I think that at least the prosecutors I've seen have done a good job of when someone's going to jail, they have given them opportunities to try to address. Now, that, you know, obviously isn't always getting it done, and that's why part of that conversation has been to include in the detention centers, treatment facilities in the detention centers. But I guess to answer your passion, I think, yeah, there has been a lot of discussion. I think there continues to be discussion and realization that we need to really look at how we're treating these people.
Thank you all so much. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Great conversation.